So welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. My name is Amantha King. I'm a workplace menopause consultant and I'm an executive performance coach. I often forget to say that. So I do both of those things. I'm delighted to have my brilliant guest with me here today, Helen Tomlinson. Helen Tomlinson is the UK's first ever menopause employment champion. So I think that's a whoop whoop moment. So I'm really delighted to have you here with me, Helen. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more in depth about who you are, what you do, and what this current role is all about?
Of course. Cool, absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me on today. It's a real privilege to be able to talk to you about the work that I've been tasked by government to do. So thank you. So absolutely, my day job is I'm the head of talent and inclusion at the Adecco Group. So we are a recruitment, workforce management organisation, and my responsibility is to attract new to the organisation, develop them, retain them, and manage their career, whether that's in country or globally. But my other role is as you quite rightly said, the government's first ever menopause employment champion. And in that regard, I have a strategy to help employers to support their current staff, future staff, and to attract more women back into the workplace that may have left during COVID or other points in their particular journey. But yeah, so those things really go hand in hand, my day job and my government role. How I got the role, so I guess it's important that we talk about that as well and how it came about. So originally, I launched our menopause policy internally in the organisation in October 2021 on World Menopause Day, and at that time, only 10% of organisations had a menopause policy, and naturally, I was super chuffed with myself that I'd done that, but then I realised that actually it's simply a PDF, some words on it, and you can't just launch a policy and hope that it changes anything. So I set about doing education sessions in conversation with podcasts with really senior leaders who were going through menopause, which really opened up the conversation in the organisation and allowed other people to come forward and say, oh, I'm having that experience myself, and how can I get support, etc., etc. So it really snowballed, and it was an incredible experience. And then we did a round table event, and I invited Carolyn Harris to come, who at the time was the leader of the all political party group for menopause, and I invited her to be our keynote speaker. And I just said at the end of the session, we had 350 clients in the virtual room, and I just said, if anybody would like any help writing their policy, launching their policy, implementing it, embedding it, etc., please give me a shout. And I was inundated with clients saying, can you help us? So I spent much of the latter part of 2021 and 2022 talking to our Adecco clients about it, and at the same time lobbying government for change and asking them to make it a requirement for the organisations had a menopause policy. But strangely now, if somebody came to me and said, can I see our policy, I would feel like we'd failed, because what the policy does is start the conversation that changes the culture of an organisation. And that's the important thing. Without cultural change and normalising the conversation and the education that sits around that, nothing will change. So I see now our policy simply as the catalyst that made that happen. And that's really that's how it happened. I was speaking to government already. The Women and Equalities Select Committee recommended a number of points in a report, one of which was to have the champion role. And at the same time, the 50 plus choices working party, they also recommended the role as well. And I had a call with government, and they said, they gave me all the details. And with my old recruiter hat on, I've been doing recruitment for 30 years, I was taking down all the notes thinking, oh, they're giving me the brief so I can find them somebody. And then at the end, they sort of said, so what do you think? And I was a bit, oh, do you want me to do it? So it was really, it absolutely came completely out of the blue. But yeah, it's just been an incredible journey since then, and still, so much to do. I'm just at the starting point, really.
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I've told a number of people that I would be interviewing you, and people said to me, well, where can I find out more about Helen Tomlinson? About people, and it's this
Yeah.
classic thing, isn't it? People don't realize how many people are working behind the scenes.
Mhm.
We've got
Yeah.
amazing grassroots supporters, people like Diane Dancebrink, and people who sort of impact on these committees and these all parliamentary groups. But
Absolutely.
actually, I'm not sure that a lot of people understood the process, because you're part of the Department of Work and Pensions, aren't you? Is your role affiliated
Yes.
within
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. It absolutely is. So I'm working closely with Mims Davis, who is actually the Minister for Social Mobility, um, youth progression and change, and she kept menopause because it was part of her portfolio previously. And I'm also working with Dame Melissa Regan, who owns the Women's Health Strategy for the UK and Ireland. So yeah, really working very closely with her, and doing roundtable events, etc., road shows to raise awareness with employers. But I've created a strategy that for me will allow us to see real results. I come from a commercial background. I'm used to working to targets, having KPIs, results, etc. So that's how I like to work, and I've got a really specific strategy that I'm implementing at the moment.
Are you able to share any of that with us?
I
And
am, yes, of course I am. Yeah, I'd be
yeah,
delighted to. So essentially, the strategy is around working with employers to share best practice. So where employers are doing some really good stuff, and there absolutely are employers out there that are doing phenomenal stuff to support their staff through perimenopause and menopause. What the roundtable working groups will all be headed up by a sector body that's relevant to that sector. So, as an example, the hospitality sector, we will have UK Hospitality supporting them, care sector, Care UK, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you what the sectors are shortly. So, first of all, we'll have a cross sector roundtable to get the conversation started and look at the best practice. And then after that, we will have a series of 6 sector specific roundtable events. And the sectors are the focus sectors for government. So they are adult care, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, education, and professional and technical, which professional and technical allows us to bring in, assorted organisations that don't necessarily sit in a specific sector. So that they will start to form working groups where they will share best practice. That best practice will be housed on a portal. And so that's the first bit, that there will be best practice that can be shared within the sector. The reason that I'm doing it within sector is because the challenges in hospitality are different to the challenges in manufacturing, are different to the challenges in professional and technical. So it's very sector specific support for that sector. I'm really passionate about the fact that not everybody works for a large corporate organization. And when I first started having these conversations, I spoke to a lady who ran a charity. It was basically where it was like a pupil referral unit for children who had left mainstream education, and they ran a radio station. And she was going through menopause, and she said to me, "My line manager is a 32-year-old DJ. I have got nobody to talk to about my symptoms." She said, "I feel like I'm going to have to leave." And I've heard, a lot of that conversation around having to leave your role, etc. So I feel really passionate that there is that opportunity there for people in smaller organizations to have access to best practice. And it's not reliant on them having a certain HR budget. It's not reliant on their CFO or CEO saying, yes, we'll allocate money to this support, because it will be there for them on the portal. The second thing is about having somebody to talk to. So a lot of organizations have allyship programs, menopause champions, which is brilliant. But again, if I work in a small organization, and I always use a hotel in Devon, as an example, how do I find somebody to talk to if I've nobody to talk to in my own workplace? So we will link them up with large organizations who are willing to have people, for them to talk to. So shared best practice, allyship program. The third aspect of it is menopause friendly accreditation, which I think is really important because there is a real drive from government to bring women back into the workplace who are economically inactive at the moment or claiming benefits. And many of those women will have been out of work for a period of time, whether through choice or because of redundancy or whatever. It's very hard coming back into the workplace after a period out of it, regardless of the reason, whether it's through choice or not. And if you've then gone into perimenopause or menopause, finding an employer that's going to support you when you go back can be a big challenge. So that accreditation will help women to make choices about going back into the workplace. And the final aspect of it is obviously comms strategy, so that employers know, SMEs know what we are doing, what opportunity there is for them, and what support and education there is out there. And obviously, as I said, working with a number of sector bodies, but I'm also working with CIPD because what they do transcends all the sectors. So they're being really, really supportive and helpful in getting the messaging out there as well.
Yeah,
And doing
fantastic.
things like I'm doing today
Yeah,
is really, really
absolutely.
helps.
That's such good, clear explanation. So could I just come back on a couple of those things then?
Of course.
So I've recently worked with a global pharmaceutical company, and it just resonated with me so much because we've actually done it the other way around. We start with awareness first, then we get into training, then we write a policy and guidance because we feel we've created that culture of openness and transparency that people then can sort of interact with it. But one of the challenges that we've actually come across is that, and we're glad that we've done it that way round, because actually policy and guidance looks very different on the factory floor to a laboratory to an office space to home working,
Completely.
and and it does require that attention to detail, doesn't
Yeah,
it? Because it's almost like
absolutely.
four different sectors really within one
Within
organization.
one, yeah, completely. And it's a bit like the NHS brought in flexible working for women going through menopause, and that's fine if you work in, I don't know what the percentages of office-based roles in the NHS, but obviously it's significantly smaller than frontline staff. And so effectively, it's a two-tier policy because if you haven't got the choices to work from home or be flexible, you simply haven't got the choices.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a lot of detail that has to go into that policy creation and actually thinking through what is the right thing to do. Because in my experience, if you start to talk about reasonable adjustments, it's very easy to say, the person needing the reasonable adjustment has to walk towards it and say, this is what would really help. I say to, line managers, do not assume, don't go into solution mode straight away. And, that is a natural. When I do men only sessions, I really labor that point because often men, rather than talk and have an uncomfortable conversation, they want to go straight to solution mode. And what that means is you actually might do something that makes the situation worse. And the
Yes.
example that I always give in a previous role, I worked in an office and my office was all glass. And I was perimenopause at the time. I wasn't on HRT and I had hot flushes all the time. And I happened to mention it. And the following day, they got me a fan on a stand, a full-sized fan on a stand. And they'd even put a sticker on it that said, Helen's fan, do not remove. So naturally, everybody was saying to me, why have you got a fan? I haven't got a fan. Why have you got a fan? And obviously I was really open. I said, oh, perimenopausal, I'm having hot flushes. But if I'd been a different type of personality, that could have had if I was, lacking in confidence, was
Yes.
embarrassed about it,
Yes.
that could have made the whole situation 100 times worse. So my point with that is, and when I went to meetings, I had to unplug it, take it down the office, take it with me and plug it back in. And eventually they got me a little fan, but even so, it just, it became a bit of a running joke about here she is with a fan, but that could have been really, really damaging for somebody. So my point is, don't make the assumption that you know what's right for the individual without them, saying, well, this is what I really need.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because we also talk about that, in that actually, I think sometimes for businesses, the assumption is this is going to be a big deal trying to reasonably adjust for someone. And the reality is, when you do step into those lovely open conversations, you find that actually it's usually a very, very small adjustment that costs often next to nothing.
Absolutely.
But for people to just feel comfortable. But yes, we've got to be really careful about how triggering some of these things can be for
completely.
people during this time. I
But I also think, sorry, that it is just about having the conversation, because there may well be nothing that a line manager can really do, but it's the feeling of being heard and being understood. And 98% of women who leave the workplace due to menopause say it's because of the psychological aspects of it, not the practical and the physical. So just to be able to say to a line manager, I am really struggling with brain fog, anxiety, loss of confidence. I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to know that this is how I'm feeling, is such relief for, but for them to not be thinking she's not as good as she used to be. Well, what is it? Why is that the case? So often the conversation is all that is really needed.
Agreed. I completely agreed. And I'm really pleased to see that, in those 6 specific sort of round tables you talked about, there is that breadth and that diversity, so that we should be able to capture what best practice looks like. When you talk about menopause friendly accreditation, is that something that's going to be offered centrally? So almost like that is, I mean, how does a business get that?
There are a number of them. Obviously I'm doing quite a lot of due diligence at the moment, because people are coming to me and saying, have you seen this? And this is what, there are a number of, but what I want to give is opportunity and different price points, because I think it's really important that you can have a price point that works for your organization. So there are a number already in the market, in the space, if you like. I don't plan on recreating anything to add to that, because I think there's an awful lot there already. I mean, just as an example, the British Standards Institute launched their national guidance on Wednesday, I think, of last week, and that is completely free of charge for any employer who wants to download it and use it.
Actually,
which that's access for everyone.
Yes, and that's British Standard 30416. Because I was
Absolutely
researching it
well
earlier.
done.
And it is really interesting, because it doesn't just cover menopause. Actually, it's menstrual health and menstruation, which is wonderful, isn't it? Because we often talk about,
I agree, and really important, I think. Really important, because what we found was that allowed us to broaden out the conversation to be more inclusive. We've got 5 generations in our workplace, so to talk about across the generations about impact, and obviously you can go into early menopause, but some of the symptoms are obviously akin to experiences of other symptoms, or other conditions, sorry. So, it could be polycystic ovary, endometriosis, or it could just be that somebody's really struggling with, heavy periods in the workplace. So I think the broadening out and opening up that conversation is really important.
Yes, absolutely. And I really liked, because I'm such, I really like to get into these sorts of things. So I was reading it today. The official launch is in July, isn't it?
Yes,
There's going to be
it is 5th of July.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be there, which is
oh,
wonderful.
amazing. Well, we'll be able to meet in person then.
But it's talking about mobile roles, static roles, highly physical roles. And I thought that was so refreshing, because if we take each of those, for example, if you're in the police service, the ambulance service, that would be part of like a mobile role. What does menopause, menstruation look like there? Static roles, like being a cashier. Someone once told me, Helen, that when they were on a factory line making prescription medicines, the legislation in order to maintain what we call good manufacturing practice, that if someone was flooding, the amount of paperwork to just remove and go and get changed.
I mean,
and this is the sort of thing, and this is the sort of thing I think we really need to get into, don't we, to make it easier for people that, and people, and I was asking this, working party, well, how is that for you? And they said, well, it's just great. You know, the thing is, I can't step away from my line because the line is running, and the line runs 24 hours a day. So I think the more that we can sort of drill into what menopause looks like, and I've got a great colleague called June Potts, who I'll just name check, and June always says to me, it's not always about menopause in the workplace. It's always about menopause in your workspace. So what does your workspace look like? And therefore, what do those accommodations need to look like?
I would absolutely agree with that. And actually, the topic of flooding, I think, is really important, because that is one of the most debilitating practical symptoms of menopause. And actually, it affects 44% of women. And I also think it's one of the most difficult to start a conversation with your line, anybody, absolutely. And when I did an interview for the Times not long after I'd been appointed, and she asked me if I would talk about my experiences, and I said absolutely I will. And then at the end she said, would you like me to take that bit out? And I said no, I wouldn't, because if me talking about that and saying that it affects 44% of women allows just one woman to take a copy of the paper, show it to a line manager and say, this is what I'm experiencing, and she can use it as a prop to be able to do that. I said it's worth, you know, putting in there, because it must be so incredibly difficult. As I said earlier to you, I had flexibility when I was experiencing that. I could work from home long before COVID this was, but not everybody has that. And absolutely, you're right, it's about your workspace and the impact on you. And if you're standing in front of a classroom, running a ward in a hospital, you know, working in the military, you don't have those choices. You've just got to get on with it. And it must be horrific thinking, is this going to happen?
You're absolutely right. And it's the reason I didn't return to mainstream work, actually, after having my daughter. My flooding episodes were so bad, I was bleeding every 14 days for 6 days. I couldn't leave the house. I became chronically anemic with a 2-year-old. And so you sort of think, I was fortunate in that I had that time. I was still on maternity, you know, but the reality is, for so many women, they just don't have those choices. So women are strategizing the whole time. Our handbags get bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Where can I go? What can I do? How long can I stay there for? Horrific.
And it just shouldn't be like that, because for all the reasons that we know, when we bring it back almost into a business context, we need that diversity in those boardroom settings across businesses. We need to be keeping women in work. And like you say, you know, statistically, when we're losing so many highly skilled people from those upper levels, who tend to be women navigating this, we've no time to wait, really, have we? We really need
agree. We've got to get it right. I mean, this shouldn't be a time when you think you've got to step out of your career, step back or step down, because you know, if it's handled properly and you get the right support, you've probably got another 10, 15, maybe 20 years in your career, which arguably could be your best years, because generally perimenopause happens around the time when you've probably gone into the most senior role of your career. So I'm really passionate that it should be the best experience it can be for women, so that they can carry on doing what they want to do and often love doing, whether that's, you know, financially or you know, educating other young girls and, you know, creating a better experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so one of the things that we can't shy away from is the statistics. They're not great, are they? I mean, certainly when we look across businesses, there is almost the noise is getting louder. There is still a bit of apathy, because we've only got, I mean, it was 10% of organizations had a policy. Now it's about 17%. Why do you think people just aren't getting on with it, Helen? And what's it going to take?
I think one of the challenging things, and I'm genuinely seeing a big difference in attitude, conversation. And somebody asked me, I spoke at an event yesterday, and they said to me, "What do you want for the future?" And I said, I don't want us to be having sessions like this because, you know, generationally, the previous generation didn't have sessions like this, but for a different reason. It wasn't talked about. We're talking about it now, but my hope is that for when, my daughter's generation don't need sessions like this because it is just part and parcel of working life, women's health, this is what needs to be done. So almost doing ourselves out of a role, if you
Yes.
like, or a path. Um, I'm definitely seeing much more uptake in the sessions that I do for which are men only. So I've done those internally, externally. I've done them with government departments, and I'm being asked to do them more. And I'm being asked to do them because they're safe spaces, and I think that's really important because it's not just about the workplace or the workspace. I'm being asked about, how can I support my mum, my sister, my partner, etc. So it's becoming more normalized. It's more of normal conversation. I mean, 2 years ago, I would not have expected to be having a conversation in my village pub on a Friday night with a group of men about menopause. And I appreciate it's partly because of what I'm doing, but that's brilliant that that conversation is happening. So I do think there is more happening. I think it's definitely moving in the right direction. Wanted to move faster, of course we do. But as I said right at the beginning, the policy is just one aspect of it.
Yes.
So actually, I would rather we were having conversations and the culture of organizations were changing than people having a PDF that goes in a file that they have to refer to if it goes a little bit wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%, because one of the ways that we've been noticing that we're getting more of an uptake in the work that we do is that we talk about knowing your numbers.
Hmm.
And for lots of businesses, I think that's one of the first critical steps, is to go to, okay, to what extent is this not an issue, but to what extent do we need to give this consideration in our organization?
Hmm.
And so once people start to know their numbers through HR dashboards, etc., it's actually relatively easy. I think the quickest I've ever had someone produce figures was 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so knowing your numbers, I think for a lot of people, actually just getting into it, seeing what it
Hmm.
is, can often be quite a good starting point. Because if we're finding, as we have done, that we've got 70% of our menopause population are in our operations team, and we don't have a strategy,
Yeah,
that's making the business vulnerable instantly. So
absolutely.
and I think you're right. We've all got male allyship is totally important. Partner
Mm.
allyship is really important, because it isn't just the person who's going through the menopause. But I agree with you. I think these rich conversations, I think we just need to get them going even more, because we do
Mm.
know, if we know what might happen at the next general election, if a Labour government gets in, they are
Yeah.
mandating, aren't they? Any
Mm.
businesses with 250 employees
Yeah.
needs to be publishing their data. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
I think again, I still think there is obviously a role for a policy, but if it is doing anything with that part, and I just look back to when we launched our policy. As I said at the start, I was so pleased with myself because I'd launched a policy. But actually, the dial didn't start to change until we run inclusion brunches. So we did an inclusion brunch. We do one every week, 45 minutes on lived experience and education. We did one on menopause. Then we now have a hot topics network, and where people can join and talk about it, share articles, etc., etc. It was when we started doing that the conversation started to change. Not me saying it's World Menopause Day today, we've launched our policy. It was the catalyst for the conversation, but that's all it was really, because that just started us down the route of doing the manager training, having the workshops, opening up the conversation, having our menopause champions. From that, we've used that model for so many different topics. That we would never have launched. We did one a session on hell, we're talking about periods. I would never have been able to launch that into the business without launching the menopause topic first of all. So I absolutely think there is a role for the policy, but I don't think the policy is the silver bullet that is going to make it all perfect for women in the workplace.
No, agreed, because actually we'll know that that's worked by retention rates, presenteeism going down, absenteeism going down. That's the proof of the pudding, really.
Yes,
almost is in it, and it's that cultural piece that you're talking about. So if I were to ask a provocative question, is whose responsibility is it in a business? So if anyone's watching this and they're thinking, yep, that's all great, I'm sure someone's dealing with that around here. Because I get that quite a lot. People go, well, it's not me. That's an
not
HR.
My job. Yeah.
That's an HR role, isn't it? Well, and the HR goes, well, no, I think that's more senior leadership team, stakeholder decision making. Who do you think we should be approaching?
I think it's everybody's responsibility to retain a diverse workforce, because a diverse workforce is a stronger workforce. We know that. So from an HR perspective, there is a role to play if there is going to be a policy, so they would own the policy. But the cultural, I think a lot of it comes from lived experience, and you've almost got to get somebody to lead that conversation around, this is what is happening, and be bold enough to stand up and start the conversation. So I think we have a very much a joint approach. It goes from leadership level, right across leadership. My role is talent and inclusion, so I'm responsible for attracting and retaining talent and making sure we're inclusive as an organization. So a number of different, it's line manager responsibility, but I also think there's a responsibility to the individual as well, because you can't just go into work and say, I'm perimenopausal, what are you going to do for me? Because it just doesn't work like that. And I think there is that we are really keen on education around lifestyle choices, diet, exercise, nutrition, all of that, because it can't just be a workspace requirement to do something. You've got to take responsibility yourself. But I think the more people start to talk, the more people are going to come forward and say, actually, this is happening to me as well. So I mean, arguably, it's 50% of your population, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In our organisation, we're 74% female.
Well, this is it. I had the pleasure of working with Charlotte Tilbury, makeup brand, and they are literally, I think, 80-90% who identify as female, but a younger demographic actually, which is really interesting. So it is about valuing women, because actually there's a much bigger picture here, which is about attracting new talent. It's not just about retaining your current talent, it's about that attraction of talent. And we're seeing that the market is very, very fluid. People are leaving jobs, not necessarily for monetary differences, but for support differences. And so companies that really grasp the nettle on this stand to really attract that top talent, those people who have a lot of skill, who are just going to move because they want to know that they're going to be supported during this midlife stage that they're going through, which is really, really powerful. So now, very menopausally, there you go. I had a question really lined up. I was just going to ask you. It's just gone. It's gone, but I'm sure it will come back. But is there anything I haven't asked you, Helen, that you think people would like to hear?
I think we've covered a lot. I think it's really important that people understand what the plan is, what the purpose of the role is, how I approach it and tackle it. So I think we've covered quite a lot on that. I just want as many people to understand that it's, I'm doing this for people who haven't got either the platform, the opportunity, or the confidence to advocate for themselves for a better experience in the workplace. So I'm really keen to hear from anybody who's having working for an organization that are doing some really good stuff, because I want to be able to share that as part of this. But also anybody who is, having a really tough time, because their experiences can help to shape what the strategy looks like. So it's important to me that it's for what we do is for everybody across all socio-economic demographics, cultural aspects of it, and for people who work in large and small employers.
Yeah, absolutely. The question's just come back to me. I've had a number of people say to me this week that why aren't we having a information campaign, a national information campaign? I know Diane Dancebrink from the Menopause Support charity has actually launched a booklet this week, which hopefully will be available in a downloadable format, much like is happening in Ireland at the moment. So people who maybe might be going to a food bank might see this leaflet on the side. Why, would there be a benefit to us having a national campaign that people could see on bus shelters? Because not everyone is going to be in work accessing these resources in work. I mean, is there a validity around that? Because people are already doing it to a degree.
I think, and I've just forgotten my answer then into that question.
That's both of us then.
Oh, we're doing well this afternoon. I absolutely think there is a validity for that, and I think there are a couple of things there that I think need to probably improve, and we've not even touched on HRT yet, but obviously that's not for everybody. Not everybody can take HRT, but only 50% of the population take it at the moment. The legislation to reduce the price, I think, will hopefully have a positive impact on that. It would be better if it was the same as the other devolved nations, but reducing the price to an annual prescription fee is a good step in the right direction. But we need to be sure that there is enough HRT in production. So I think that's one of the reservations about having a national campaign, that if there is a national campaign, there probably aren't enough GPs at the moment who are fully educated, or there isn't enough HRT. So I think there's a couple of things that need to happen before that national campaign is rolled out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I myself was without my Utrogestan last week. Horrendous. I could not have been in a workplace.
Yeah,
because I was
absolutely.
chronically sleep deprived, because I needed it to help me sleep. And again, how many people, even though sunny dispositions, are turning up to work sleep deprived, having to go through the motions? And I'm not on an operating line, I'm not operating heavy machinery, I'm not driving a heavy goods vehicle, but we will have people across the nation who are, because
Absolutely.
of the HRT shortages. So I do think it does have to be more of a priority. Whatever the reasons are that it hasn't been up until now, I have to move out of the way, because we can't address the fact that we've got women stepping away from the workplace who will need support from the state system unless we can shore up some of these processes. So you're absolutely right. I mean, when I'm working with business, I am pleased to say that they are providing additional supports for those women, whether that's through employee assistance programs, whether that's through myself. I'm a menopause coach, so I can actually have one-to-one conversations and guide women in terms of what their options are. And like you said before, sometimes it's just being heard can make a massive difference to someone who's just had a 25-minute session, for example. So I think there's lots of ways around it, and I think we just have to be a bit more creative to that. So coming towards the end, which is such a shame because I could talk to you for ages, but what is your hope then? I mean, how long is your tenureship in this role, Helen? Do you know how long you're here for?
18 months. So so to embed, launch a strategy, embed it, communicate it. So it's 18 months. But I think my hope absolutely is obviously that it's successful and we start to change the narrative, start to reduce the number of women who are leaving work due to the experience that they are having, more women coming back into the workplace, working for menopause-friendly employers. But my real hope longer term is that, as I said before, that we don't need to be having these conversations, because it is just and understanding that it is part and parcel of, women's health, and just to be able to have that open conversation that actually it's not just about menopause or period management in the workplace. It's just that compassion and open conversation to say, what else can I do to support you? So, it's really important to be able to bring your whole self to work, and we've seen a real step change in that regard recently from employers. But more of that would be great, to just open up the conversation and be able to say, is there anything else we can do to support you more broadly? And I think that would be really important, and would mean that we just won't need these conversations in the future, and these sessions, if you like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it probably doesn't need saying, but we say it anyway, and that includes partners and people who are supporting people going through the menopause transition. Because I often say, if you're lying in bed having a hot flush or a night sweat, the person next to you probably is also awake and they're not sleeping
Yeah.
well either. So it's that compassion and kindness all round, isn't it? And that
Yeah.
willingness to learn and understand.
Mm-hmm.
So one last question then. If there's one thing you wish you'd known before you went through your perimenopause, what do you wish you'd have known that you could share with other people?
I think, I mean, I honestly just didn't know what was happening. The word perimenopause, I'd never heard of it at that stage. We're going back to 2013 now, so probably nearly 10 years ago. And I went to see a gynecologist, and I said, I want a hysterectomy. And she was like, oh no, we're a long way from that yet. And 2 years later, after pretty much having a period for those whole 2 years, just with the odd few days off here and there, and being on the pill, having the injection, and having the coil all at the same time in hormonal levels all over the place. But I wish I'd known that absolutely 44% of women experience what I was experiencing, because yeah, it was just so debilitating. But actually, that I thought it was something more sinister and serious, because I didn't realize that at 41 you could be, perimenopausal, because people just didn't use that word. So I wish broadly there'd been a lot more education.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I certainly know that what gets me up every day, even though I don't have my Utrogestan always available to me, is always keeping those women in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to the fact that there are women that, for hundreds of thousands of women across the country, that just don't have the opportunity to advocate for themselves, or they could be really, really struggling, and they've got nobody to talk to.
No. And so we must, we keep fighting for them. That's
Yeah.
definitely that's definitely important. And so, how can people follow you, Helen? Because I'm sure people will be so interested now that they know about you and want to know more about what you're doing. What's the best way for people to follow you or see what you're up to?
Probably through my LinkedIn profile. So if you message me through LinkedIn, of course I will come back and respond, whether that's about sharing best practice, just asking a question, wanting to understand the strategy a bit more. But yeah, that's probably the best place.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute
I'm
pleasure.
so grateful. It is, you're such a busy person. And maybe it might be nice if we could have a second part, maybe at some stage, just to see how things are going.
I would love to.
That,
Absolutely love to.
that would be lovely. But for now, Helen Tomlinson, thank you so much for your time and best of luck with all that you're doing.
Thank you.